A 9-year-old girl heads out to buy a few things for school: a packet of pencils. She stops at the local news agency to buy some lollies. Then she ducks into a pharmacy and buys a toothbrush. Just ordinary errands on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a quiet beachside suburb of Sydney in 1986. At 6:45 p.m., Samantha Knight is seen walking towards home. And this is the last confirmed sighting of her alive. For the next 16 years, her family have no answers. No one knows what happened to the little girl who should have been home within minutes. Then, years later, an unlikely prison friendship, a game of chess, and a storage unit filled with disturbing photographs would uncover the truth. This is the case of Samantha Knight. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for clicking on today's video. If you are new here, my name is Ebony Rose and I cover mostly Australian true crime cases, missing persons, and unsolved mysteries. If you are passionate about true crime and helping bring awareness to these cases, I'd love for you to support the channel by giving this video a like, a nice comment, and subscribing. It really does help these stories reach more people. Before we begin, I want to just give a quick trigger warning. This case does involve the abduction and murder of a child, as well as discussions about child sexual abuse. While I won't be going into any graphic details or really no details at all, some viewers may still find this case quite distressing, so please take care while watching. Now, let's get into the case of Samantha Knight. Before Samantha Knight became one of Australia's most heartbreaking missing children's cases, she was just a little 9-year-old girl. Samantha Therese Knight was born on the 27th of March 1977 to Tess Knight and Peter Omega. When she was still young, her parents separated and her surname changed from Omega to Knight. She spent her early years living in Manly before moving to Bronte, and by 1986, she and her mum Tess were living in a block of flats on Imperial Avenue in Bondi. It's important to remember this was the mid-1980s. Life looked very different back then. Kids had a lot more freedom than they do today. It wasn't unusual for a child Samantha's age to have their own house key, to walk to the local shops alone, or spend the afternoon outside with friends until it was dinner time and time to come home. Parents weren't constantly checking in by phone because, well, there were no mobile phones back then. For Samantha, that kind of independence was completely normal. Bondi felt familiar, the neighbors knew each other, and running a quick errand wasn't something anyone would have thought twice about. Looking back now, it is easy to wonder if things should have been different. But at the time, there was nothing unusual about the life Samantha was living, which makes what happened next all the more heartbreaking. It was Tuesday, the 19th of August, 1986, just another school day. Samantha got home at around 4:15 that afternoon. She had a snack, turned on the TV for a little while, and changed out of her school uniform into a bright pink skirt and a blue jumper, which was very 90s. A little later, she headed back out, and based on witnesses' accounts, she was most likely going to the local shops to buy some pencils that she needed for school. When her mum Tess got home from work later that evening, she noticed Samantha's half-eaten snack still sitting on the kitchen bench. At first, she wasn't overly concerned. Samantha often spent time outside with the neighborhood kids after school and would usually wander home not long after Tess got back from work. But as the evening wore on and it started getting dark, that feeling quickly turned into worry. Tess began checking with neighbors, then calling family and friends, and no one had seen Samantha. By 8 o'clock that night, she reported her 9-year-old daughter missing. As police began piecing together Samantha's final movements, several witnesses came forward. One reported seeing her buying pencils at a local shop. Another remembered seeing her at the news agency buying lollies. And at around 5:30 that afternoon, one witness said that Samantha told her that she'd actually lost her house key. Then around 6:30, she was reportedly seen going into a nearby pharmacy to buy a toothbrush. The last reported sighting came at approximately 6:45 p.m. when Samantha was seen walking along Bondi Road in the direction of home. It's worth mentioning that not every one of these sightings was ever conclusively confirmed to have been Samantha, but together they formed the timeline investigators would work from for years. After that, there was just nothing. No witnesses reported hearing a scream. There was no sign of a struggle, and nothing suggested Samantha had planned to run away. She simply never made it home. By the following morning, Bondi had become the center of one of Australia's biggest missing children searches. Thousands of volunteers joined police searching streets, parks, and beaches. Posters with Samantha's face appeared on shop windows, telegraph poles, and notice boards all across Sydney. Investigators even dressed a mannequin in Samantha's clothing and had a child actor walk the same route she was believed to have taken, hoping it might trigger someone's memory. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and eventually months became years. What had started as the search for a missing little girl slowly became the search for answers that no one seemed to be able to find. Now, back then in Bondi, there was barely any surveillance cameras out. I don't know if there was really any because there's no surveillance footage of Samantha. So they basically had to go off these witness statements and they had to believe that was her in all of these statements. And that's why they built the timeline off that and not off surveillance cameras. To understand how Samantha's case remained unsolved for so long, we need to talk about the man who would eventually confess to killing her. His name was Michael Guider, and on the surface, there was nothing about him that stood out. He worked as a gardener. He was known quite well for his knowledge of Aboriginal rock art to the point that he actually was on TV for it. And he came across as friendly, helpful, and dependable. He was the kind of person people trusted. But behind that image was someone living a very different life. Guy had grown up in an unstable home as a child. He spent time in institutional care, including at Melrose Boys' Home, where both he and his younger brother Tim were sexually abused by one of the carers who he said went by the name of Mr. Goodard. Guida also claims that he noticed that the other boys in the home were also being abused and that he would eventually go on to start sexually abusing boys in the home as well. Guida also later told prison psychologist he had been abused in other ways by his mother during his childhood, although not every claim he made about his past has been independently verified. Now, none of that excuses what he would go on to do next. As an adult, Guida deliberately sought out vulnerable families, particularly single mothers who were already stretched incredibly thin. He would offer to help with odd jobs, he would become a familiar face, and slowly earn their trust. Many of the children he abused knew him as Uncle Mike. How disturbing is that? He offered to babysit, telling their mums they deserved a night off. And they did. From the outside, it just looked like an incredibly kind gesture. Instead, it was how he gained access to children. Investigators later discovered that Guida would drug some of his victims with Normosil, a prescription sedative, before sexually abusing them and taking photographs. He kept those images, referring to them as his happy snaps. For years, no one knew what he was doing. Then, finally, in 1996, everything began to unravel. A 6-year-old girl found the courage to tell her mother what Guida had done to her and her friend. That one disclosure led police to uncover years of abuse involving at least 11 children between the ages of 2 and 6. Guida was arrested and charged with more than 60 child sexual abuse offenses dating back to the early 1980s. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison with a non-parole period of 10 years, which to me is just not enough. It's just not enough. As horrific as those crimes were, no one connected Guida to Samantha. That connection wouldn't come until 2 years later, and it would happen in the most unexpected way imaginable. By 1998, 12 years had passed since Samantha Knight had disappeared. For all that time, her family had lived without answers. How distressing would that be? Then investigators searched a storage unit belonging to Michael Guider. What they found would change the entire investigation. Inside were thousands of photographs, newspaper clippings, scrapbooks, and photographic slides that Guider had kept for years. Among them were photographs that investigators identified as Samantha, along with 2 of her friends. There was over 4,000 photographs found in suitcases and boxes in this shed, which is just horrific because he would have had to take them all by himself with an actual camera. For the first time, police had something they'd never had before, a direct link between Michael Guider and Samantha Knight. Up until that moment, there had been no evidence connecting the two. Now there was. The photograph showed that Michael Guider had access to Samantha, something he had never admitted to before. When people questioned him, Guider acknowledged that he knew Samantha, but he denied having anything to do with her disappearance. Despite the disturbing discovery, investigators still didn't have enough evidence to charge him with her murder. It seems like the case had reached another dead end. But that breakthrough wasn't going to come from new forensic evidence or another search. Instead, it would come from an unlikely friendship that Michael Guider formed behind prison walls. And that conversation would finally reveal what happened to Samantha Knight. So I have just shown a couple of the photos that the police found of Samantha Knight and her friend, and they are quite innocent photos. But there is one that I'm not going to post on here that I saw, and it was Samantha and her friend. And they were both laying on the floor, and Samantha was laying in between her friend's legs, and they were both clearly passed out. And the friend's dress was up far enough just to be able to see her knickers. So I just wanted to include that to, I guess, give some more context to what these photos actually were. And I'm sure there's a lot more disturbing ones on there that, I just didn't read about. According to Frank, Guider was the one who approached him, asking if he wanted to play chess. Over the next 7.5 months, the two men spent hours together playing game after game. As time went on, Guider began talking more openly about his life and eventually about Samantha Knight. Frank later told police that Guider confessed to abducting a little girl named Sam. According to Frank's evidence, Guider claimed he had taken Samantha to another location and drugged her. He said that at one point, she regained consciousness, recognized him, and called him by name, asking him what he'd been doing. Guider eventually told Frank that he drugged her again, left the scene, and when he later returned, she had died. Frank carried that secret for a short time. He later said that the weight of what he'd been told completely overwhelmed him. According to his own account, he attempted to take his own life that same night because he couldn't process what he had heard, and he didn't want to be in a world where people did that to children. Eventually, Frank made the decision to tell authorities. He agreed to become a Crown witness, and his testimony would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in finally bringing Samantha Knight's killer to justice. So a little bit more context on what Michael Guider was actually doing to these children and how he was making them pass out, basically. And this comes from a witness statement from the little girl and other people that he had time with, was that he would, make it all fun. He would bring Coke, he would bring lollies, and then he would get the Normicin and he'd put it in the bottle of Coke. He would then offer this Coke to the children and they'd drink it and they'd pass out. I mean, they trusted him. Of course they would have. Or some of them wouldn't have even known what was going on and what was happening. The 6-year-old girl who came forward told police that as soon as her friend's mum left, that the atmosphere just completely changed. The dirty mags were out on the table. There was music playing, and then he would offer them a Coke. She said that she remembered feeling at the age of 6 that this wasn't good and that she just needed to get out of there. She said that she got picked up by her mum and she was just crying hysterically and begging her mum to take her friend with them because she didn't want to leave her friend with Michael and what he was doing. It would be a few days later that she would actually confide in her mum and her aunt of what had happened on this day that Michael looked after them, and that's when they went to police. In February 2001, after 15 years after Samantha's disappearance, Michael Guider was finally arrested and charged with her murder. Now that they had these photos they could connect them, police believed that they had finally had enough evidence to hold him responsible for what happened to Samantha. But just a few months later, the case took an unexpected turn. The Crown accepted a guilty plea to manslaughter instead of murder. Guider claimed he had drugged Samantha with the prescription sedative Normicin so that he could sexually abuse and photograph her, the same method he'd used on other child victims. He said he had accidentally given her a fatal overdose that claimed changed everything. Because Samantha's body had never been found, there was no forensic evidence to prove exactly how she died. Prosecutors couldn't rule out Guider's version of events, and rather than risk losing a murder trial, they accepted the manslaughter plea. Even then, many questions remained unanswered. Guider never explained why he didn't call for help. He never gave investigators a clear account of exactly where Samantha died or what had happened to her afterwards. In August 2002, he was sentenced to 17 years in prison with a non-parole period of 12 years. Like, that is just still not enough time for the crimes they committed, and I personally believe it wasn't tough enough. For Samantha's mum, Tess, the sentence didn't bring closure. Outside the courtroom, she told reporters that the conviction only confirmed what the family had feared for years. What she wanted wasn't revenge. She just wanted her little girl back. And more than anything, she wanted to know where Samantha's remains had been left. For years, police tried to work out where Samantha had been taken. They'd heard different stories from inmates who claimed Michael Guida had spoken about moving her body, but none of these accounts could be verified. One version suggested Samantha had first been buried at Cooper Park at Woollahra before being moved about 18 months later to the grounds of the Royal Sydney Yacht Club at Kilbilly, where Guida had once worked as a gardener. Police searched Cooper Park more than once. They found nothing. Then in March 2003, something changed. Years of refusing to cooperate, Guida agreed to speak with investigators, including Detective Steve Leach. During that interview, Guida gave police an account of what happened after Samantha died. Investigators had already established that some of his earlier claims about knowing Samantha were false. He had initially downplayed their connection, but police later uncovered evidence he had known and abused Samantha before her disappearance. Guida eventually directed police to an area near a gum tree on the grounds of the Royal Sydney Yacht Club, claiming he had buried Samantha there. On the 15th of May 2003, detectives began excavating the site. Cadaver dogs indicated interest in one section of the ground, giving investigators a moment of hope. Samantha's parents, Tess Knight and Peter Omega, stood nearby as police carefully dug through the earth, hoping that after nearly 17 years, they might finally be able to bring their daughter home. But as excavation continued, the digging reached bedrock. There was nothing there. Investigators later formed the view that if Samantha had originally been buried at that location, her remains may have been unknowingly removed during major construction works at the site in 1988. If that's what happened, they were likely taken away with tons of excavated soil and lost forever. For Samantha's family, that was another devastating blow. They finally had answers about who had taken their daughter, but they were left without one thing they'd hoped for all these years: the chance to bring Samantha home. One detective stated that he sort of believed that Michael lived in his own world and that they weren't 100% sure when he was telling this truth, what story was actually 100% the truth, if their stories were just a mix of different things that were going on in his head at the time. Michael told detectives that he had taken Samantha, he'd picked her up from the side of the road, he'd taken her back to a garage, and I mean, they still don't know where this shed or this location actually was, and that there was a couch there. He'd given her a Coke, she'd drunk it, and then he started to sexually abuse her. In the middle of it, she actually woke up and stated him by name, said, "Michael, what are you doing?" And then he gave her another Coke and left for a couple of hours. And then when he came back, she was on this couch and she was unconscious. And then when he got closer, he realized that she was actually dead. Even after the guilty plea, the prison sentence, and the searches, Samantha's story has never been completely solved. That's because so much of what investigators knew came from one person, and that person was Michael Guida himself. And Guida had spent his entire life manipulating the people around him. And over years, he gave different versions of what happened to Samantha. Some of those accounts contradicted each other, while others couldn't be verified at all. One of the biggest questions surrounds what happened to Samantha's remains. The story that he buried her before later moving her and disposing of her during construction work didn't come from police interview or a courtroom. It came from what Guida allegedly told his fellow inmate, Frank Sunis. During the month they spent playing chess together. Even the lead detective on this case has publicly questioned whether that account was the truth or simply another version of events that Guida told to suit himself. Then there's one more detail. According to Frank, Guida claimed he wasn't alone that night. He allegedly told Frank that another man known only as Mr. G was present when Samantha died, and Frank believed this statement. he was shown a photo of the man. Police did investigate that claim and they reportedly identified someone they believed matched Guyda's description, but they couldn't place that person with Guyda the night Samantha disappeared. No one else has ever been charged in connection with Samantha's death, and there is no public evidence that another person was involved. It's entirely possible that Guyda invented the story to shift some of the blame away from himself. It is also possible that he didn't. The truth is, no one actually knows. But there's one thing that I keep coming back to. Guyda claims Samantha's death was an accident, that he had accidentally given her too much of the same sedative that he has used previously on other children, and then continues to use on more children when he abuses them. Why did he continue drugging and abusing children in exactly the same way afterwards? Nothing about his behavior suggests someone haunted by a terrible mistake. Instead, it suggests someone who simply carried on. And that's perhaps the hardest part of the case. Even after all these years, we're still left trying to piece together the truth from the words of a man who made a lifetime out of lying. By 2019, Michael Guyda had served the non-parole period for Samantha's manslaughter conviction. But that wasn't the only reason many people feared his release. By then, Guyda had been convicted of more than 60 child sexual abuse offenses involving 13 children over a period spanning more than a decade. The New South Wales Attorney General went to court in an attempt to keep him behind bars, arguing that he still possessed an unacceptable risk to the community, which he did. But in September 2019, the Supreme Court rejected the application. I mean, can you believe that? Michael was released from prison. His freedom came with some of the strictest supervision conditions possible. He was fitted with a 24-hour electric ankle monitor, banned from having contact with anyone under the age of 18, restricted in where he could go, and made subject to dozens of conditions designed to closely monitor his movements. Even then, many people remained deeply concerned. His own brother publicly described him as a hunter, saying he believed Michael would continue looking for victims without drawing attention to himself. Some of the people Guyda had harmed also spoke out. Survivor Lisa Giles described living with the lasting impact of the abuse and the fear that came with knowing the man who had abused her was back in the community. Another survivor, Chantel Daly, who was just 6 years old when Guyda abused her while babysitting, spoke about the anxiety of knowing she could unexpectedly see him in public. Then, just a few days later, those fears became reality when he was released. In 2022, Michael Guyda was returned to prison after police found child abuse material on his phone. For many, it reinforced what they'd believed all along, that despite everything he'd admitted to and everything he'd been convicted of, Michael Guyda had never truly changed. Michael Guyda died in custody in September 2024 at the age of 73. With his death, any hope that he might one day tell the full truth about what happened to Samantha died with him. To this day, Samantha Knight has never been found. Police believe they know who took her life. They know who was responsible for the years of unanswered questions, the searches, and the unimaginable grief her family has carried for decades, but they never were able to bring Samantha home. For her family, that's a loss that can never truly be measured. Samantha was just 9 years old. She left home on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon to buy a few things for school. It was something children did every day in 1986, and her mum had every reason to believe she'd be back a short time later, but she never was. Today, there isn't a grave where her loved ones can visit. There are only the places her story passed through. The streets of Bondi, the courtroom, years of police investigations, and the hope that one day every missing child will be found. Samantha Knight should be remembered for the little girl she was, not for the man who took her future away. If this case has stayed with you, please consider sharing Samantha's story. Even after all these years, remembering her matters. It matters to help give awareness. It helps hopefully protect future children from something that could potentially happen to them. We need to teach our children to not keep secrets, because if something like this happens, we need them to tell us so that we can prevent anything like this ever happening again. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This is just one of those cases that really stays with you. It's just absolutely heartbreaking And it's a chilling reminder that there are people out there capable of doing unimaginable things. If you are passionate about helping keep these stories alive and bring awareness to Australian missing persons cases, I'd really appreciate if you could give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Every bit of engagement helps more people discover Samantha's story and the stories of other Australians who are still missing. Thank you again for being here and for taking the time to remember Samantha with me. That's all from me today. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.